The cantina on Veltor Station existed in that perfect state of disrepair that attracted the galaxy's most desperate souls. Flickering lights cast dancing shadows across walls, stained by decades of spilled drinks and dried blood. The air recyclers wheezed with the effort of filtering out the combined stenches of 40 different species, and the result was a chemical soup that burned the sinuses of anyone foolish enough to breathe too deeply. Crix Valmora sat in the darkest corner, her 4 eyes scanning every entrance, while her secondary hands never strayed far from the twin plasma pistols holstered at her hips. The Valanthe bounty hunter had earned her reputation through 200 successful captures across 15 star systems. Her carapace bore the ritual scars of the Hunter's Guild, each mark representing a target that had believed themselves uncatchable. Tonight, she studied the holographic display projected from her wrist unit, memorizing every detail of her newest quarry. Zeth Khan, the Undying. The name alone was enough to make lesser hunters decline the contract. A morphid warlord who had carved a bloody path through the Outer Rim territories, leaving nothing but dead worlds and traumatized survivors in his wake. The bounty on his head had grown to 12 million galactic credits, enough to buy a small moon and retire in comfort. But it wasn't the money that drew Crix to this hunt. It was the challenge. Zeth Khan had killed 37 bounty hunters who had attempted to claim his head. 37 professionals, some of them legends in their own right, reduced to nothing more than warnings left floating in space, their bodies arranged in grotesque displays of the warlord's contempt. "You're really going after him, aren't you?" Crix didn't turn toward the voice. She had detected the approach of the Sindari male 3 minutes ago, his heavy footsteps impossible to miss despite his attempts at stealth. His reflection shimmered in the polished surface of her drink, a tall, blue-skinned humanoid with the characteristic cranial ridges of his species. "Torvax," she acknowledged, "I thought you were still running cargo on the Meridian routes." The Sindari slid into the seat across from her, his movements carrying the careful grace of someone who had survived too many bar fights to take anything for granted. "I was, until I heard what you were planning." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "This is suicide, Crix, even for you. The bounty is 12 million. The bounty could be 12 billion, and it wouldn't matter if you're dead." Torvax's yellow eyes darted nervously around the cantina. "Zeth Khan isn't just dangerous, he's something else entirely. The things I've heard." "I've heard the same stories." Crix finally looked up from her display, meeting his gaze with all 4 of her eyes. "That's exactly why I'm going to be the one to bring him down." Torvax shook his head slowly. "There's something you don't know, something that's changed everything." "Enlighten me." Zeth Khan's last known position was in the Korath Nebula, hunting some merchant convoy that had the misfortune of carrying something he wanted. Standard operation for him: intercept, destroy, pillage. Torvax paused, swallowing hard. But something happened. His entire fleet scattered. 27 warships, each one crewed by the most vicious pirates and mercenaries in the galaxy, and they ran like prey animals fleeing a predator. Crix felt her interest sharpen. Ran from what? That's the thing. Nobody knows for certain. But the direction they fled. Torvax pulled up his own holographic display, showing a star map of the region. They were heading toward human space. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Crix felt something she hadn't experienced in decades, a tiny flicker of uncertainty. Human space. Every spacefaring species in the galaxy knew about the humans. They had to. It was a matter of survival.
That doesn't make sense, Crick said slowly. Zeth Khan is many things, but he's not stupid. No one goes into human space uninvited, not even him.
That's exactly my point. Torvax leaned back, his expression grave. Whatever scared his fleet badly enough to scatter them across 3 sectors must have been catastrophic. And now, Zeth Khan is running toward the one place in the galaxy that's more dangerous than he is. Crix stared at the star map, her mind racing through the implications. The bounty contract was clear. Bring Zeth Khan back alive for trial, or bring proof of his death. It said nothing about where she had to find him. "The contract is still valid," she said, finally, "regardless of where he runs." Crix. Torvax reached across the table, grabbing her primary arm with surprising strength. "Listen to me. I've known you for 30 years. I've watched you take down targets that should have been impossible. But this is different. Human space isn't like anywhere else. The stories about what happens to those who enter uninvited." "Stories are just that. Stories."
"Are they?" Torvax released her arm, his expression haunted. "My cousin served on a diplomatic vessel that strayed too close to their border 10 years ago. The ship was returned to us 3 days later, completely intact. Every system functional, every piece of cargo accounted for. But the crew?" He shuddered. "They wouldn't speak. For months, they wouldn't speak about what had happened. And when they finally did, their accounts were fragmented. Impossible."
What did they say? That the humans had boarded them. That they had been studied, analyzed. That the humans had taken something from them. Not physically. Nothing you could measure or quantify. But something important. Something that made them less than they had been. Torvax's voice dropped even lower. "My cousin killed himself 6 months later. The others followed within the year. Every single one." Crix absorbed this information, filing it away alongside everything else she knew about humanity, which, she had to admit, was less than she would have liked. The humans were relative newcomers to the galactic stage, having developed faster-than-light travel only 3 centuries ago. In that time, they had carved out a modest territory on the far edge of the Orion Arm, keeping largely to themselves while building. Nobody knew exactly what they were building. The few trade delegations that had been permitted entry returned with stories of incredible technology and disturbing philosophy. The humans, it seemed, had a very different relationship with concepts like death, individuality, and consciousness than any other species in the known galaxy. And they were protective, extremely protective. "The contract," Crix said again, her voice firm, "is still valid." Torvax stared at her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "You've already made up your mind. You made it up before I even sat down." "I appreciate the warning." "No, you don't." He stood, his movements heavy with resignation. "But I hope you remember it. When you're out there, in their space, and you realize that everything you thought you knew about being a predator was wrong." He paused at the edge of the table, looking back one last time. "The humans don't hunt, Crix. They don't need to. They just wait. And whatever they're waiting for, I pray you're not it." He disappeared into the crowded cantina, leaving Crix alone with her thoughts and the holographic image of her target. She finished her drink in one long pull, then began planning her route into human space. The journey took 3 weeks. Crix's ship, the Silent Verdict, was a customized Volanthi interceptor designed for exactly this kind of work. Fast enough to catch any target, well armed enough to disable without destroying, and equipped with enough stealth technology to slip past most sensor nets undetected. The first 2 weeks were uneventful. She followed the scattered trail of Zethkon's fleet, piecing together the story of their desperate flight from the debris and distress signals left in their wake. Several ships had been destroyed, not by human weapons, but by their own crews. Suicide charges detonated in engineering sections, life pods ejected into empty space with their occupants still inside. Whatever had happened in the Korath Nebula had broken something in these hardened killers. They were running blind, caring nothing for survival beyond the immediate moment. And they were all heading in the same direction. On the 15th day, Crix found the first direct evidence of human involvement. It was a Morphid cruiser, one of Zethkon's personal guard ships, drifting dead in space at the edge of an unremarkable star system. The vessel was intact, no visible damage, no signs of weapons fire. But it was completely dark, every system offline, every running light extinguished. Crix approached cautiously, her sensors working overtime to detect any traps or ambushes. Nothing. The cruiser was as dead as a ship could be while still maintaining structural integrity. She docked with the vessel and boarded, her weapons drawn and ready. The interior was worse than she had expected. The crew was dead, all 400 of them. But they hadn't been killed in any way Crix recognized. There were no wounds, no signs of violence, no indication of what had ended their lives. They were simply stopped, frozen in whatever positions they had occupied when death found them, their expressions ranging from confusion to terror to something that looked almost like peace. Crix moved through the ship methodically, documenting everything. In the command center, she found the captain's log, still accessible despite the ship's offline status. The final entry made her blood run cold. They came through the walls, not through airlocks, not through breaching pods, through the walls themselves. At first we thought they were ghosts, incorporeal, impossible to hit, but they were real. They touched us, and where they touched us, we understood. The captain's voice in the recording was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that came from accepting something so terrible that fear had simply ceased to function. We understood what we had done, every life we had taken, every world we had burned. We felt it, not as memory, but as experience. We were the victims of our own atrocities, dying over and over again in an instant that lasted forever. There was a pause in the recording. When the captain spoke again, his voice had changed. It was no longer calm. It was broken. They gave us a choice. They said they always give a choice. We could carry what we had learned, carry it forever, knowing what we truly were. Or we could simply stop. Another pause. None of us chose to carry it. The recording ended. Crix stood in the silent command center for a long time, processing what she had heard. The Morphids were not a species known for conscience. They were predators, pure and simple, evolved on a death world that had taught them that the only moral law was survival. For something to make them feel guilt, genuine, devastating guilt, was not just unlikely, it should have been impossible. And yet, here they were, 400 killers who had chosen death over living with the knowledge of their own crimes. What could do that? What power could reach inside a being's mind and force them to experience the suffering they had caused? The answer came to her unbidden, a whisper from old stories and older fears. Humans. Crix returned to her ship and continued deeper into human space. The border was unmarked. There were no warning beacons, no patrol ships, no visible sign that one had crossed from free space into human territory. And yet, Crix knew the moment she entered. She felt it, a subtle shift in the texture of reality itself, as if the rules that governed the rest of the universe had been quietly suspended. Her sensors went haywire almost immediately. They were detecting objects that couldn't exist, energy signatures that violated known physics, and spatial distortions that suggested she was somehow in multiple locations simultaneously. Crix ignored them as best she could, focusing on the navigation data she had gathered from the dead Morphid ship. Zethkon's trail led deeper still, toward a star system that wasn't on any galactic chart. It took another 4 days to reach it. The system was wrong. That was the only word that fit. The star at its center burned with a light that seemed to flicker between colors that Crix's eyes couldn't quite process. The planets orbiting it were arranged in perfect geometric patterns, their movements synchronized in ways that violated every law of orbital mechanics. And between those planets, structures drifted, massive, incomprehensible structures that bore no resemblance to stations or ships or anything Crix had ever encountered. She was not alone. The Silent Verdict's sensors, despite their earlier confusion, now registered dozens of ships scattered throughout the system. Crix recognized most of them, the remnants of Zethkon's fleet, the vessels that had survived the flight from the Koref Nebula. They were arranged in a rough formation around a small, rocky moon, their weapons pointed outward in a defensive perimeter. And inside that perimeter, on the surface of the moon itself, Crix detected a single life sign consistent with Morphid biology. Zethkon the Undying, for target. She began her approach carefully, broadcasting no signals, running on minimal power. The other ships made no move to intercept her. They seemed frozen, as trapped by indecision as the dead crew of the cruiser she had boarded. Then a voice spoke directly into her mind. "Welcome, Hunter." Crix's hands flew to her weapons, but there was nothing to shoot at. The voice had come from everywhere and nowhere, resonating in her skull without passing through her ears. "You have traveled far to find the one you seek. We admire persistence." "Who are you?" Crix demanded aloud, not knowing what else to do. "We are the collective. We are humanity, and humanity is us. But these words mean little without context, and context requires time you may not wish to spend. I'm here for Zethkon. He's wanted for crimes against the Galactic Confederation. I have a legal contract for his capture or termination." "We are aware of the charges against the one called Zethkon. We are aware of many things." There was a pause, and Crix had the disturbing sense of something vast turning its attention more fully toward her. "Your hunt has carried you into our space without invitation. This is normally problematic. I'll leave as soon as I have my target."
"Will you?" The voice carried something that might have been amusement. "The one you call Zethkon has proven difficult to take. 37 of your kind have tried. 37 have failed. What makes you different?" Crix straightened in her pilot's seat, defiance rising despite her fear. "I'm better than they were." "Perhaps. Or perhaps you simply haven't failed yet." Another pause. "We have a proposition for you, Hunter. Will you hear it?" "Do I have a choice?" "Always. Choice is the foundation of consciousness. Without it, sapience is merely sophisticated programming." The voice seemed to grow more serious. "But choices have consequences. If you decline to hear our proposition, you may continue your hunt without our interference. However, you will receive no assistance, no information, and no guarantee of survival. The one called Zethkon has taken refuge in a place we cannot easily reach without disproportionate measures. And if I agree to hear your proposition? Then we will speak. And when we have finished speaking, you will make another choice, one that may determine not only your fate, but the fate of many others. Crix considered her options. The fleet surrounding Zethkon's position was formidable, far beyond what she could handle alone, and the fact that the warlord had made it this far into human space meant he had resources and capabilities that the intelligence reports had failed to account for. "Speak, then," she said. "I'm listening." The presence in her mind shifted, and suddenly Crix was no longer on her ship. She stood on an endless plain beneath a sky filled with stars that moved visibly, dancing through the heavens like living things. The ground beneath her feet was solid but featureless, extending in all directions to a horizon that seemed impossibly far away. She was not alone. A figure stood before her, humanoid in shape but not quite human. It was taller than any human she had seen in images, its proportions subtly wrong in ways that suggested intention rather than deformity. Its skin shifted through patterns of light and shadow, and its face was both perfectly symmetrical and somehow asymmetrical at the same time, as if different versions of it were overlapping in the same space. "This is an interface," the figure said. Its voice was the same as the one that had spoken in her mind, but now it came from a single source. A way for us to communicate in terms your cognition can process. What you perceive here is not reality. It is a translation of concepts too complex for direct transfer. "What are you?" Crix asked. Her weapons were gone, she realized. She was unarmed and unarmored, vulnerable in a way she hadn't been since childhood. "We are what humanity became, what they chose to become, through centuries of careful progress and occasional catastrophic leaps. We are the collective, the unified consciousness of 17 billion human minds, networked and integrated while still preserving the spark of individuality that defines our species." Crix struggled to process this. "You're all of them? Every human?" "Not all. Not yet. The collective is voluntary. Those who do not wish to join may remain separate. But those who join become part of something greater. They retain their selves, their memories, their fundamental identities. But they also gain access to the minds of all others. They become we, and we become them." "That's insane." "By your standards, perhaps. By ours, it is the next stage of conscious evolution. But this is not why we brought you here." The figure gestured, and the starscape above them shifted, resolving into an image of Zethkon's moon. "The one you hunt has become a problem for us. Not because of his crimes, those are beyond our jurisdiction, and frankly, the suffering of species that do not belong to the collective is not our primary concern." The figure's expression shifted to something that might have been regret. "We are not altruistic. We do not pretend to be. We protect ourselves and our territory, and we pursue our own development. The struggles of the greater galaxy are not our responsibility." "Then why is Zethkon a problem?" "Because he has taken something that belongs to us." The image zoomed in, focusing on a structure on the moon's surface. It was small by human standards, barely 100 meters across, but it pulsed with an energy signature that made Crix's newly apparated sensors scream. "One of our nodes," the figure explained, "a processing center for a portion of the collective. When Zethkon's fleet fled into our space, they detected its signature and recognized its value without understanding its nature. The warlord himself led the assault, believing he could capture human technology for his own use.
He attacked you?
He attacked a portion of us. The node was designed for peaceful functions, data processing, memory storage, the maintenance of connections between minds. It had no defenses worthy of the name. The figure's expression hardened. 47 members of the collective were housed there. They are now hostages. Crix felt a cold certainty settle into her bones. He's holding human minds captive. More than that, he has connected them to himself using modified neural interface technology. If we attack the moon directly, if we attempt to force our way past his defenses, the feedback will destroy not only the captive minds, but a significant portion of the network they connected to. The figure paused. We could absorb the loss. The collective would survive. But those 47 individuals would be gone forever. Not just dead, but erased. No continuation, no transcendence. True non-existence. And you're not willing to accept that. No. For the first time, the figure's voice carried genuine emotion. Every mind in the collective is precious. Every perspective, every experience, every unique way of processing reality adds to the whole. We do not sacrifice our own, not for convenience, not for strategy, not for any reason. Crix understood, finally, why the humans had reached out to her. You want me to retrieve your people. We want you to complete your hunt. Zeth Khan has made himself a target that must be neutralized. The charges against him by your Galactic Confederation are irrelevant to us. Our grievance is separate and more immediate. But your goals and ours align. You want me to kill him? We want you to stop him. If you can capture him alive, so be it. If death is the only option, we will not mourn. But we cannot act directly without risking what we cannot afford to lose. Crix considered the proposition. It was insane, going up against a warlord who had killed 37 of her predecessors, backed inly by the nebulous support of a collective consciousness that admitted it couldn't intervene directly. But the contract was still valid, and if she succeeded, she would not only claim the 12 million credit bounty, she would also prove once and for all that Crix Valmora was the greatest bounty hunter in the galaxy. What can you offer me? She asked, in terms of practical support. The figure's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. Information. We have been observing Zeth Khan since his arrival. We know his defenses, his routines, the psychological state of his remaining forces. We can also provide you with technology, not our most advanced systems, but tools that will level the playing field against his numerical advantage. And when I bring him down, when I free your people, you will be permitted to leave human space unharmed, with your bounty and your reputation intact. You will also have earned something more valuable than credits, the favor of the collective. In a galaxy where we are viewed with fear and suspicion, having a friend who has seen our true nature may prove useful. Crix didn't miss the implication. Useful to you or to me? Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. The future is not a fixed path, Hunter. It is a probability space that collapses into actuality through the choices of conscious beings. We cannot tell you what will happen, only what might, and what we hope for. It was more honesty than Crix had expected, and despite everything, the strangeness of her situation, the fear that lurked at the edges of her awareness, she found herself trusting it. All right, she said, tell me everything you know about Zeth Khan's defenses. The figure nodded, and the plane around them transformed into a detailed tactical display. 3 hours later, Crix was back in her ship, descending toward the moon. The silent verdict had been upgraded during her time in the interface space. New systems had been integrated with her existing technology. Weapons that shouldn't exist, sensors that could perceive in dimensions she couldn't comprehend, a stealth field that bent light and gravity around her hull. The ship felt different now, almost alive, responding to her thoughts before she could translate them into commands. "You're in my head," she had said to the figure before leaving the interface. "Part of you, anyway." A small connection, the figure had admitted. Necessary for the technology to function. It will fade when you leave our space, unless you choose to maintain it. And if I do? Then you will always have a voice to speak to, a perspective beyond your own, a friend, if you wish, though we would not presume to claim such a relationship without your consent. Crix hadn't answered. She wasn't sure she could. Now, as she approached the moon's surface, she focused on the task at hand. Zethcon's defenses were formidable, but not impenetrable. The warlord had arranged his ships in a sphere around the moon, with overlapping sensor coverage and interlocking fields of fire. Getting past them would require precise timing and a route that exploited the gaps between their detection capabilities. Fortunately, the collective's intelligence was comprehensive. Crix had memorized every patrol pattern, every sensor weakness, every moment when the odds shifted in her favor. She slipped through the sphere like a ghost, her ship invisible to every system that searched for it. The moon's surface was a cratered wasteland, marked by the scars of ancient impacts and more recent construction. Zethcon's base occupied the largest crater, a sprawling complex of prefabricated structures and repurposed ship components. At its center stood the captured human node, a smooth, black obelisk that pulsed with the same strange energy Crix had seen from orbit. She set down a kilometer from the base's perimeter, powering down her ship and preparing for the final approach on foot. The collective's gifts extended beyond her ship. Her armor had been enhanced with the same reality-bending technology, and her weapons had been replaced with devices that hummed with contained power. Most importantly, she had been given something she had never possessed before, a direct link to a mind vast enough to process every variable of the combat to come. "We are with you," the voice whispered. "We will guide you where we can, but the ultimate actions must be yours. We cannot possess you, cannot override your will. That would make you a tool rather than a partner." "Just point me at the target," Crix muttered, beginning her approach. The base's outer defenses were formidable. Automated turrets, sensor nets, roving patrols of Zethcon's remaining warriors. But they were designed to detect threats from above, not below. The collective had identified a network of tunnels beneath the surface, remnants of some long-forgotten mining operation that predated even the node's construction. Crix moved through them like a shadow, her enhanced senses warning her of obstacles before she encountered them. The tunnels were tight, barely large enough for her to crawl through, and they stank of ancient dust and something else, something organic that she preferred not to identify. After an hour of careful progress, she emerged inside the base's perimeter. The interior was a maze of corridors and chambers, filled with the remnants of Zethcon's once mighty army. Most of them were in terrible condition, wounded, starving, driven half-mad by whatever they had experienced in their flight from the Korath Nebula. They huddled in corners, staring at shadows, their weapons clutched in trembling hands. "They are broken," the collective observed. "Whatever happened to them has left psychological scars that may never heal. They are no longer soldiers, they are victims." "That doesn't make them less dangerous," Crix replied silently. slipping past a group that was too focused on its own terrors to notice her passage. No, wounded creatures are often the most dangerous, but it does mean they will not fight with their former skill. Exploit their fear, and they will shatter. Crix filed this away, continuing toward the center of the base. She encountered her first real opposition at the entrance to the node chamber. A pair of morphid warriors, better fed and clearer-eyed than the others, stood guard before a massive blast door. They wore ceremonial armor that marked them as Zethcon's personal elite, the last remnants of a force that had once numbered in the thousands. Crix studied them from the shadows, calculating angles and probabilities. She could take them, she was certain, but doing so quickly and quietly would require precision. The one on the left has a damaged hip, the collective noted. He favors his right side in ways that suggest the injury is recent. The one on the right is overcompensating for exhaustion. His reaction time will be impaired. Armed with this knowledge, Crix struck. She emerged from the shadows like a nightmare-given form, her enhanced weapons discharging in perfect synchronization. The first warrior fell before he could raise his own, a precise shot taking him through the gap in his armor where the hip met the torso. The second managed to get off a single wild shot before Crix was on him, her secondary arms driving blades through his neck with surgical precision. Both were dead in less than 3 seconds. Crix didn't pause to admire her work. She accessed the blast door's control panel, feeding it the codes the collective had extracted from Zethcon's captured communications. The door slid open. The node chamber was larger than she had expected, a vast hemispherical space that had been carved from the moon's bedrock. At its center stood the obelisk, its surface crawling with patterns of light that hurt to look at directly. And surrounding it, connected by cables and neural interfaces, were the hostages. 47 humans, suspended in frames that held them upright while machines invaded their skulls. Their eyes were open but empty, their mouths moving in silent words that Crix couldn't hear. And before them, seated on a throne of scavenged technology, was Zethcon the Undying. He was smaller than Crix had expected. The morphid warlord stood barely 2 meters tall, his form wiry rather than muscular. But his eyes, compound organs that glittered with malevolent intelligence, told a different story. This was not a being that ruled through physical strength. This was a predator that survived through cunning and cruelty. "A Valanthe," he said, his voice rasping through translation implants. "I was beginning to think your guild had given up on me." Crix kept her weapons trained on him, scanning for traps. "Zethcon the Undying, you are wanted for crimes against the Galactic Confederation, including the destruction of 17 inhabited worlds and the deaths of approximately 8 billion sentient beings. Will you surrender peacefully?" The warlord laughed, a wet, gurgling sound that spoke of lungs not designed for the atmosphere he was breathing. "Surrender? To you? One hunter, alone, in the heart of my stronghold?" "Your stronghold is in enemy territory. Your fleet is broken. Your warriors are shattered. You have nowhere left to run." "Run?" Zethcon rose from his throne, and Crix saw that he was connected to the node as well, cables running from his own neural interface to the human captives. "Why would I run? I have exactly what I wanted." He gestured at the suspended humans. "Do you know what these creatures are? Not just their bodies, those are unremarkable, but their minds?" His eyes glittered with greed. "They are connected to something vast, something that spans light years and encompasses billions of intelligences. And through them, I am connected too." Crix felt a chill run down her spine. You've linked yourself to the collective. I've tasted the collective, Zethkon corrected. Just a taste. The full experience would burn out my nervous system in seconds. But even that taste, he shuddered with something that might have been ecstasy. They think they're so superior, these humans. They believe their hive mind makes them gods. But they're wrong. It makes them vulnerable. All those minds, all that power, and it can be accessed by anyone with the right tools and the will to use them. What are you planning? Planning? The warlord laughed again. I've already begun. Through these hosts, I've been learning, studying, every secret the collective possesses, every piece of technology, every weakness. And when I have everything I need, I will take what I have learned back to the galaxy. I will build an empire that makes my previous conquests look like child's play. He stepped toward Crix, his movements confident despite the weapons pointed at him. The humans were right to be afraid. They were right to hide in their little corner of space, hoarding their treasures and pretending they were above the rest of us. But they made a mistake. They let me in, and now nothing can save them. He's wrong, the collective whispered in Crix's mind. The connection he's established is shallow, a parasitic tap on our network, not true integration. He can sense our surface thoughts, but he cannot access our depths. And the strain of maintaining the connection is destroying his neural tissue. He has perhaps 3 days before his brain hemorrhages. He doesn't know, Crix murmured aloud. Zethkon paused. What? You think you're winning. You think you've discovered the secret to ultimate power, but you're dying. Crix allowed herself a cold smile. The connection you've established is burning you out from the inside. In 3 days, maybe less, your brain will liquefy. All those stolen secrets will mean nothing because you won't have a mind left to use them. The warlord's expression flickered. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his features. You're bluffing. Am I? The humans are watching you right now, Zethkon. They've been watching you since you entered their space. They know everything about your condition. The tremors in your left hand, the blind spot developing in your peripheral vision, the headaches that are getting worse every hour. You thought you were stealing their power. Instead, you were setting a trap that they let you walk into. We must clarify, the collective interjected. We did not anticipate his actions. The trap he walked into was of his own making. The neural interface technology he's using was never designed for non-human biology. His deterioration is a natural consequence of his own choices. Crix ignored the correction. The important thing was that Zethkon was rattled. His confidence was cracking, and cracks could be exploited. It doesn't matter, the warlord snarled. But his voice had lost its certainty. Even if I'm dying, I still have leverage. These humans, they're precious to the collective, aren't they? Irreplaceable. If you attack me, I'll destroy them all. The feedback will cascade through the entire network. You've already been over this with the collective directly. They can absorb the loss. But they don't want to. Zethkon's eyes narrowed. That's why they sent you. That's why they haven't attacked directly. They're willing to sacrifice 17 billion minds to save 47. He laughed bitterly. Even at the end, even with their godlike powers, they're limited by sentiment, by weakness. Crix had been circling slowly as they talked, putting herself between the warlord and the door. She had also been studying the chamber, noting the placement of the neural cables, the control systems, the load-bearing structures. And she had been communicating with the collective. There is a way, they had said. The interface maintaining his connection to the captives is vulnerable. If it is destroyed, completely destroyed, not just damaged, the connection will be severed before the feedback can propagate. The captive minds will be traumatized but intact. What about him? Crix had asked. Without the interface, his stolen power will be gone. He will be diminished, still dangerous, but mortal, killable. And the interface? Beneath his throne. A single device, heavily shielded, but not impervious. You will need to get close, very close. Crix had accepted this. She had prepared. Now she acted. Her primary hands discharged their weapons in a continuous stream, not at Zethkon himself, but at the walls and ceiling around him. The enhanced energy bolts tore through stone and metal, sending debris cascading into the chamber. The warlord dove for cover, shouting commands to forces that didn't respond. His remaining warriors were too broken to come running at the sound of battle. Crix charged through the chaos. Zethkon rose to meet her, and for a moment they were locked in combat. He was faster than she had expected, his reflexes augmented by whatever his neural connection was feeding him. But he was also dying, and his body betrayed him in small ways, a stutter in his movements, a slight delay in his reactions. She fought defensively, giving ground while keeping herself between him and the throne. He pressed the attack, clearly believing he had the advantage. He didn't see her secondary arms moving. The blades struck the interface device with perfect precision, guided by the collective's real-time analysis. The shield resisted for a fraction of a second, then collapsed. The device shattered. Zethkon screamed. It was a terrible sound, the cry of something having a vital part of itself torn away. The warlord collapsed to his knees, his hands clutching his head as the connection he had built was severed in an instant. Blood poured from his nostrils and ears, and his eyes rolled back in their sockets. Behind Crix, the suspended humans convulsed in their frames. But they didn't die. Their mouths opened in unison, and a single voice emerged from 47 throats. "We are free. We are intact. We thank you, Hunter." Crix didn't respond. She was focused on Zethkon, who was rising unsteadily to his feet. The warlord's eyes had cleared, and in them, Crix saw something she had never expected: resignation. "You've beaten me," he said quietly. "I should kill you for that. I should tear your organs from your body and feed them to the void. But..." He swayed, then steadied himself. "I am so tired." "The contract says alive or dead," Crix said. "I'm giving you a choice." "A choice." The warlord laughed weakly. The humans spoke of choices, too. They said that was what made them different, that even their collective was built on individual decisions freely made. He shook his head. "I didn't understand then. I don't know if I understand now. But I am too tired to fight." He extended his hands, wrists together, the universal gesture of surrender. Crix bound him without taking her eyes off his face. The journey back to the border of human space took 2 days. Zethkon sat in a containment cell in the silent verdict's hold, sedated and restrained. He hadn't spoken since his surrender, and Crix was content to leave him in silence. The bounty would be paid either way. The collective spoke to her often during those 2 days, filling the silence with conversation that was strange but not unwelcome. "You fought well," they said. Better than we had any reason to expect. If you ever tire of hunting, there would be a place for you among us." "In your hive mind? No offense, but that's not really my style."
"We understand. The offer remains open should you ever reconsider. But there are other ways to serve the collective, as an ally, an agent, a friend. The galaxy is large, and there are threats beyond any single species' ability to address." "You're talking about making me some kind of ambassador." Ambassador, agent, friend. The words are flexible. What matters is the relationship, one of mutual benefit and mutual respect. Crix considered this as she guided her ship toward the border. The connection to the collective was still active in her mind, and she had come to appreciate its presence. It wasn't intrusive. They never took without asking, never pushed beyond the boundaries she set. But it was there, a vast intelligence that had chosen to treat her as an equal despite the disparity in their capabilities. "I'll think about it," she said finally, "after I collect my bounty, after I've had time to process what happened." That is all we ask. The border crossing was uneventful. As Crix's ship passed from human space into the unclaimed territories beyond, she felt the collective's presence diminish. It didn't disappear entirely. The connection they had established was more durable than the simple gifts of technology, but it faded, becoming a whisper rather than a constant voice. "Farewell, Hunter," they said, "until we speak again." "Until then," Crix replied. She found herself meaning it. 3 weeks later, Crix delivered Zethkon to the Galactic Confederation's judicial authority on Central Station. The warlord was processed, tried, and sentenced in a proceeding that lasted less than a day. His crimes were too well documented, too horrific, to require extensive deliberation. He was executed by neural dissolution, his consciousness erased with the same clinical precision that had ended so many of his victims. Crix watched from the gallery, feeling nothing in particular. He had been a monster, and now he was gone. The galaxy was marginally safer. The bounty, 12 million credits, was deposited in her account before she left the station. It was the largest payment she had ever received. Enough to retire if she wanted. Enough to buy that small moon she had sometimes dreamed about. To leave the hunting life behind and spend her remaining centuries in comfort. But as Crix walked back to her ship, she knew that wasn't what she wanted. The hunt was part of her. It always had been. But now there was something else, a connection that stretched across light years, linking her to minds that were alien and strange, but also, in their own way, kindred. The humans understood hunting. They understood the drive to pursue, to overcome, to triumph against impossible odds. They just did it on a scale she was only beginning to comprehend. Her wrist unit chimed, a message encrypted with protocols she had never seen before, protocols that somehow felt familiar. She opened it. There is a situation developing in the Carvax system. A species called the Vorenthi are threatening genocide against their neighbors. The collective has no jurisdiction, but we have information that might be useful to someone with the skills to intervene. Are you interested? Crix read the message twice, then began plotting a course for the Carvax system. It wasn't about the money anymore. It never really had been. It was about the hunt, and the hunt was just beginning. Epilogue. 1 year later. The cantina on Veltor Station had burned down in an accidental fire 3 months ago. The new establishment that replaced it was cleaner, better lit, and utterly devoid of character. Crix hated it immediately. But it was where the meeting was scheduled, so she found a corner table and ordered something that was probably poisonous to most species while she waited. Torvax arrived 20 minutes later, looking older than she remembered. The Sindari's blue skin had faded to a grayish pallor.
and his movements carried the hesitation of someone who had seen too much. "You look terrible," she said as he sat down. "You look different." He studied her face with narrowed eyes. Something changed. Something fundamental. "I went into human space." "I heard." Torvax shuddered. The stories everywhere. The hunter who walked into human territory, faced down Szeth Khan the Undying, and walked out again with her prize. He paused. "The stories also say you made a deal with them, that you're connected now." "The stories are true." Torvax was silent for a long moment. "My cousin," he said finally, "the things that happened to him and his crew. Are the humans really as terrifying as the stories say?" Crix considered the question carefully. In the years since her first mission into human space, she had come to know the collective better than any non-human in history. She had worked with them on 6 different operations, pursuing targets across the galaxy with their intelligence and technology at her disposal. She had seen their kindness and their ruthlessness, their compassion and their cold calculation. "Yes and no," she said finally. "They're terrifying because they're so different. Their collective consciousness, their technology, their philosophy, it's all so far beyond what the rest of the galaxy understands that encountering it unprepared can be overwhelming." "Like what happened to my cousin?" "Probably. The collective doesn't go out of their way to harm anyone, but they also don't particularly care about cushioning the impact of contact. If you stumble into their space, they'll deal with you according to their own standards. Those standards don't always translate well." Torvax absorbed this. "But you survived." "I did more than survive. I thrived." Crix allowed herself a small smile. "They're strange, Torvax. Alien in ways that go beyond biology. But they're also good. In their own way. They genuinely believe in choice, in consent, in the value of individual consciousness. They won't force you to do anything or be anything you don't choose to be." "That doesn't match the stories." "The stories are told by people who were too afraid or too hostile to see past the surface. The humans, the collective, they react to how they're approached. Come to them with fear and suspicion, and you'll find exactly what you expected. Come to them with openness and respect." She trailed off, struggling to articulate something that didn't quite fit into words. "You're finding the limits of language," the collective whispered in her mind. "This is a common experience for those who bridge between cultures. What you wish to express cannot be contained in the vocabulary of the Valenthi tongue." "They're worth knowing," Crix said finally. "That's what I'm trying to say. Despite everything, the strangeness, the power, the fear they inspire, they're worth knowing." Torvax stared at her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "I believe you. I don't understand, but I believe you. That's enough. For now." She finished her drink and stood, preparing to leave. There was a new contract waiting for her, a mission that would take her to the far edge of the galaxy, pursuing a target that the Confederation had declared beyond reach. But the collective had information that suggested otherwise, and Crix had come to trust their information. "Where are you going?" Torvax asked. "Hunting," she said. "It's what I do." She walked out of the cantina without looking back. The galaxy was vast, filled with monsters that needed to be brought to justice, and for the first time in her long career, Crix Valmora had allies worthy of the challenges ahead. The humans had changed everything, not through conquest or domination, but simply by being what they were,
a beacon of possibility in a universe that had seemed fixed and immutable. And Crix was going to make sure that beacon never went out.